Everything about this game, from the terrible graphics to the load times, to the pointless side missions and the multiple gameplay styles which don't work, it's just a train wreck.
But the game, from a technical standpoint and the story, is a large mess. I can't recommend this game to anyone except to those who are extremely curious about it.
I'd rather rip every individual pube out of my scrotum with salad tongs than play this anymore.
I like Sonic 06. Allow me to explain.
Shadow the Hedgehog was a terrible experience, and a lot of people genuinely agree that while it had good concepts, it ultimately failed to be a good game. And not too long after, Sega was already teasing their next project called Sonic Next Gen because it was being developed for the next generation of consoles at the time, the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. It was also slated to release in 2006 to celebrate the franchise's 15th anniversary. Over the coming months, more about the game was being revealed, and it was looking to be an interesting experience. To utilize the HD capabilities of the new systems, they were going for a more realistic art style. However, behind the scenes, things were not going well. They also wanted to create a port of the game for Nintendo's newest system at the time, the Wii. However, after receiving Wii dev kits, they realized the system was inferior to the PS3 and 360 in terms of hardware, and they would essentially need to recreate the game from scratch instead of simply porting it over. So instead of doing the smart thing and outsourcing to a third-party dev team for the Wii port, Sonic Team instead decided to split their own dev team in two, thus meaning the main version now had less people working on it.
The Wii version ultimately never saw the light of day, as shortly into its development, the team scrapped it and instead turned their focus onto making an original game exclusive to the Wii. That game ended up being Sonic and the Secret Rings. I will cover this game at some point in the future, but just know it was not well received, and for good reason.
So, with half of the dev team working on another project, things were very stressful for the remaining developers for 06, but despite that, it managed to release in time for the holiday season of 2006, and word very quickly spread online of just how bad this game was, from bad gameplay, awful controls, and a numerous amount of bugs. However, my mentality as a kid was, it's Sonic, therefore it's automatically good, but as I've gotten older, I've come to see the issues people were talking about, and they don't sour the experience for me.
But that's getting a bit too far ahead, so for now, let's just talk about the story of this game.
This game's story is complicated. There are three main character stories, and just like Adventure 1, you need to piece together different events to create a cohesive narrative, which is not easy to do because this game's main story gimmick is time travel.
Oh joy.
Here is my best interpretation. Approximately 200 years into the future, the
Planet's on fucking fire.
broken buildings, massive pools of lava everywhere, the sun never shines. It is quite literally hell on Earth. It is here that we meet a telekinetic silver hedgehog named Silver the Hedgehog. Very original, guys. He exposits that the world has been like this since before he was born, and while no one will tell him directly what the cause was, they always point to the flames originating from a being known as Iblis, the Flames of Disaster. Silver's internal monologue is then interrupted by his friend Blaze the Cat, who tells him that Iblis has resurfaced, so the two head after it. I should note here that this game is not Blaze's first appearance. That honor goes to Sonic Rush, a DS game that released on the same day as Shadow the Hedgehog, funnily enough, where it was established that Blaze is a princess from another dimension, not the future.
You could at least try to care about the continuity here, people.
The two confront Iblis and manage to drive it back, but as Silver explains, it'll just resurface again later. Silver is agitated, saying that none of this matters, asking how they can finally destroy Iblis for good, when a mysterious being who looks a lot like Shadow offers a solution. This being, known as Mephiles the Dark, tells them that in order to fix this, they need to prevent Iblis from being released onto the world in the first place, using his innate powers to travel back to the past to kill the person responsible for releasing it, the Iblis Trigger, which he reveals to be none other than Sonic himself. He does this by showing Silver a video of Sonic standing in front of fire, and that's apparently all it takes for Silver to be convinced. Also, when Silver describes the Iblis Trigger as a blue hedgehog, Blaze apparently gets lost in thought about it. So, does she know who Sonic is or not? Is this the same Blaze from Rush or a different one? What the fuck?
Okay, I just want to nip this one in the bud here real quick, because from what I've heard, this is something that actually got lost in translation. You see, the script was originally written in Japanese, because Sonic Team is based in Japan, and the word used in this scene, aoi, can translate to either blue or green. And when you're calling someone green, that means you're calling them naive, which, minor spoilers, is a very accurate description for Silver. So, the phrase Aoi Harinezumi in this context can mean either blue hedgehog or naive hedgehog. So, that is why Blaze got lost in thought. Of course, that wouldn't translate well into English because blue and green are two completely separate words, so they just went with the literal translation of blue hedgehog.
Mephiles transports the three of them back in time, and they all somehow get separated, with Silver landing in the forest, Blaze landing in a beach area, and Mephiles, well, we never actually see where he lands in the past. That night, the Kingdom of Soliana is celebrating their annual Festival of the Sun, when suddenly they are attacked by Eggman, who intends to kidnap their princess, Elise, as she holds the secret to the Flames of Disaster. Before he can take her, Sonic comes to rescue her as Silver watches from a rooftop. While Sonic is fighting off some of Eggman's robots, Elise is ultimately kidnapped, but she throws the Chaos Emerald that she has to Sonic as he promises to rescue her. Silver tries to go and attack Sonic when he is interrupted by Amy mistaking him for Sonic. This causes Silver to miss his chance as Sonic runs off, and Amy decides to help him find him, not realizing they're both looking for the same person. Meanwhile, at Eggman's base, Shadow is infiltrating it on a mission to rescue someone. The people who sent him on this mission? Gun. Yep, Shadow apparently works for Gun now, despite the fact that they are the same agency that killed Maria and kept him cryogenically frozen for 50 years.
And before you all say anything, I do know about the recent interview with Sonic Team head Takashi Iizuka, where he said that Shadow doesn't work for Gun, he just helps them out sometimes if their goal aligns with his. However, there are two problems with this claim. Number one, Gunn refers to him as Agent Shadow multiple times throughout this game, confirming that, at least in this game, he does work for them. And number two, this is coming from the same man who once said there were two worlds, one with humans and one without, thus explaining why humans sometimes appear and other times don't, and that also the moon rotated after it got blown in half, so the not destroyed side faces the planet, hence why it looks intact after Adventure 2, even though neither of those make any sense whatsoever, so I'd take anything he says about the lore with a massive grain of salt.
Anyways, the agent he was sent to rescue turns out to be Rouge, as she was sent on an assignment to steal an object known as the Scepter of Darkness from Eggman. As the two escape, Rouge asks him to escort her to the rendezvous point in Kingdom Valley. The next morning, Sonic meets up with Tails, who decides to tag along to save Elise.
Long time no see.
I'm glad you...
They then decide to chase after the egg carrier on foot. Yes. They chase after Eggman's flying battleship on foot. Unsurprisingly, they are unable to catch up. Eventually, they manage to break into Eggman's desert base and rescue Elise, with Tails distracting Eggman's robots while Sonic takes Elise back to the city. Meanwhile, Silver and Amy are searching the desert for Sonic, but ultimately come up empty-handed. On the way back to the city, Sonic and Elise decide to stop in a field for some reason, and Elise explains what's going on. The people of Soliana worship their god Solaris, and 10 years ago, they nearly faced the full force of his wrath in an event known as the Solaris Project, and she also lost her father back then. This is why the people of Soliana hold the Festival of the Sun every year, to appease Solaris so he won't kill them. Of course, because that's what a Sonic game needs, a civilization that worships their god out of fear. Anyway, Sonic takes Elise's arm to try and get her to run fast, which is a bad idea for a number of reasons. Number one, they're in a field and Elise is wearing high heels, and I can tell you from personal experience that running in heels, especially in grass, is an easy way to injure yourself. Number two, Sonic runs at the speed of sound, which is dangerous for the human body. He'd more than likely rip her arm clean off. And number three, it ends with him giving her a really bad piece of advice.
If you have time to worry, then run.
Back in the city, Silver spots Sonic and Elise and goes to attack. While this is happening, Eggman kidnaps Elise again, but before Silver can deliver a killing blow, Amy steps in front of him, allowing Sonic to go after Elise. Amy, now realizing Silver was looking for Sonic with the intent to kill him, tells him that Sonic wouldn't do such a thing and Silver is wrong. Meanwhile, in Kingdom Valley, Eggman attacks Shadow and Rouge to try and get the Scepter of Darkness back, but Rouge ends up accidentally dropping it from a massive height, causing it to shatter and release the being trapped inside, who turns out to be Mephiles. And the reason he looks like Shadow is because he was resurrected through Shadow's shadow. He also immediately recognizes Shadow and decides to send the three of them into the future. I'm assuming this is when Mephiles encounters Silver and Blaze. Again, time travel is confusing. Meanwhile, Sonic and Tails encounter Knuckles, who delivers a message from Eggman, and the three head off to his base to save Elise. Meanwhile, geez, this story sure jumps around a lot, Silver is sitting by the water when Blaze shows up, and he asks her if killing someone to save the future is the right thing to do, with Blaze giving an answer that can basically be summed up as, I don't fucking know. The two decide to sneak into Eggman's base to see if they can learn something new. Team Sonic arrives, with Sonic giving Eggman the Chaos Emerald in exchange for Elise, and of course Eggman doesn't hold up his end of the deal, instead sending the three into the future with his newest machine. Meanwhile, Silver and Blaze encounter one of Eggman's robots, and after defeating it, receive the Chaos Emerald that Sonic just gave to Eggman. I guess Eggman just immediately decided to give it to his robot despite stating he needs all 7. Meanwhile, Amy is looking for Sonic in Eggman's base when she stumbles upon Elise and leads her to safety. Once back in the city, the two chat about romance, as apparently Elise has developed feelings for Sonic.
I'm good.
Amy wishes them both luck, once again not realizing they are talking about the same person. Once getting back to the castle, Elise is immediately kidnapped by Eggman. For fuck's sake, again? Meanwhile, in the future...
Wait.
Shadow and Rouge discover when they are and immediately encounter Team Sonic, who were apparently transported to the exact same moment in time down to the very day. What are the fucking odds?
Long time no see.
Shadow tells the others that in order to get back to the past, they need to utilize Chaos Control in a stronger form. He got this idea after realizing Mephiles' time travel powers feel very similar to his own Chaos Control. While searching for a Chaos Emerald, Team Sonic discovers a room where we see that this is apparently the exact same time as when Mephiles first encountered Silver and Blaze. Again, what are the fucking odds? After Silver, Blaze, and Mephiles travel back in time, Team Sonic discovers that apparently just 2 days after the festival, Elise died on board the egg carrier when it crashed and exploded, concluding that this must be how the world came to be like this. Meanwhile, Shadow and Rouge have found a Chaos Emerald and come across Omega, who appears to be in standby mode. Upon regrouping, the five head after another Chaos Emerald, being momentarily interrupted by Iblis, who has resurfaced in a worm-like form. Sonic and Shadow use the Chaos Emeralds to use Chaos Control at the same time, opening up a time portal that will allow them to travel back to the present. However, before he can jump in the portal, Shadow sees Mephiles and decides to chase after him. Once arriving back in the present, Team Sonic discovers Eggman's current location, while Rouge realizes Shadow didn't follow her, and realizing Shadow will need the Chaos Emerald, understands what Omega was doing in standby mode in the future, and asks Gun to locate him for her. Upon finding him, she explains the situation and gives him the Chaos Emerald as he prepares to go into standby mode for 200 years.
Long time no see.
Back in the future, Shadow confronts Mephiles about what happened to the world, and Mephiles explains that Shadow was blamed for it and sealed away due to humanity fearing his power. He tries to convince Shadow to join him, but Shadow states he makes his own destiny as Mephiles transforms into his true form. Shadow is almost killed by Mephiles when Omega interrupts, having woken up from his standby mode. Mephiles retreats back into the present, with Shadow and Omega following after. The two encounter Rouge in the warehouse district, where Shadow tells them to find Mephiles, while he goes to ask Eggman about Mephiles directly. Silver and Blaze encounter Mephiles and ask him why Sonic is the Iblis trigger, with Mephiles responding with basically, "Stop asking questions and just do it." The two somehow don't see the giant red flag here and decide to chase after Sonic. Shadow breaks into Eggman's train to ask him about Mephiles, with Eggman saying that Shadow needs to bring Mephiles to him first. Shadow, for some reason, agrees to this and leaves. Meanwhile, Sonic has saved Elise, again, but is then attacked by Silver, again, causing Elise to get kidnapped by Eggman, again, before Silver is stopped again, this time by Shadow, who he initially mistakes for Mephiles. Sonic heads after Eggman and Elise while Shadow and Silver duke it out. Fun fact, by the way, this is the only cutscene that appears in all three stories. I just thought I'd point that out. Elise decides she would rather die than be Eggman's prisoner again and willingly jumps off his Eggmobile, but Sonic manages to catch her in time, with the two heading off to the jungle to escape Eggman's robots. Shadow uses Chaos Control to attack Silver, with Silver using Chaos Control back with the blue emerald he got earlier, resulting in a time portal opening up. Shadow explains that Mephiles isn't trying to help Silver save the future, and tells him that in order to see the truth, they need to travel back in time 10 years, and the two jump into the portal. Upon landing in the past, the two witness the disaster take place. Apparently, the Duke of Soliana, Elise's father, was experimenting on Solaris, which Solaris didn't like, and in retaliation, creates a massive explosion, killing the two scientists who were there, and mortally wounding the Duke, who shielded the 7-year-old Elise from the blast. The blast was also so powerful that it split Solaris into two beings. His raw power, the flames of disaster, Iblis, and his consciousness, the Black Shadow, Mephiles. And it's here that Mephiles' motives start to become more clear. The two start to escape the facility, with Shadow and Silver chasing after them, with the Duke handing Shadow the Scepter of Darkness. Shadow manages to catch up to Mephiles and seals him away, thus explaining how Mephiles knew who Shadow was earlier, because apparently it was always destined that the Shadow from 2006 would travel back in time 10 years, seal Mephiles, and then return back to his time. Time travel is bullshit! Silver catches up to Iblis as the Duke comes in and uses a Chaos Emerald to seal Iblis inside Elise's soul, asking Silver to take her to a safe place and telling Elise not to cry, as that would release Iblis from her soul. And then he dies. Yes, you heard that right. If Elise ever cries, Iblis would be released. Are you seriously telling me that this 7-year-old girl went 10 years without crying once, especially after learning her father died? Because that is complete bullshit. Anyway, Shadow and Silver regroup as Silver sets the unconscious Elise against a tree, and Shadow sets the scepter next to her, already knowing what happens to it in the future. The two then use Chaos Control to open up a portal back to the present, but before jumping in, Silver gives the Chaos Emerald to Elise, telling her it's a lucky charm, thus explaining how she had it at the beginning of the game. Except for in Shadow's version of the cutscene, where Silver just immediately jumps into the portal with the blue emerald still in his hand.
Someone fucked up there. Seriously, couldn't they have just ended Shadow's version of the cutscene right after he jumped into the portal? They did something similar earlier in the game. When Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Shadow, and Rouge open up a portal back to the present, they cut Sonic's version of the cutscene right after he, Tails, and Knuckles jump into the portal without showing Shadow chasing Mephiles. Why couldn't they have done something similar here?
Also, hold the phone. Are you seriously telling me that Elise has been in possession of the Blue Emerald for 10 years? Because that's impossible! First off, this means the Blue Emerald is now stuck in a time loop. Silver gives it to a 7-year-old Elise, who then holds on to it for 10 years, giving it to Sonic when she's kidnapped. Sonic then gives it to Eggman, who then gives it to the Egg Genesis, who then drops it when destroyed by Silver. Silver picks it up, uses it to travel back in time 10 years, and gives it to a 7-year-old Elise. Also, if Elise has had the Blue Emerald for 10 years and it's stuck in a time loop, then How did Sonic defeat Perfect Chaos? How did Sonic and Shadow defeat the Final Hazard? How did Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles defeat Metal Overlord? How did Shadow defeat Devil Doom?
This is a serious continuity error. It is here that I should probably mention that, allegedly, this game was supposed to be a continuity reboot for the franchise. It would have all the same characters, except for Team Chaotic, Scream, and Big for some reason, but none of the backstory. I say allegedly because there are two problems with this claim. Number one, Sonic Generations treats this game as canon along with all the previous games. And number two, despite this claim being very widespread, it's never actually been confirmed by anyone from Sonic Team. It hasn't been debunked either, but the point still stands that the whole continuity reboot thing isn't actually true.
Jesus Christ, let's just finish this. Upon landing back in the present, Shadow meets up with Rouge, who tells him that Omega is in pursuit of Mephiles, and Shadow asks her to contact Gun to find out what materials the Scepter of Darkness was made from, having found out how to seal Mephiles. Silver meets up with Blaze, telling her that Sonic isn't the Iblis trigger, having realized Mephiles' true identity. The two learn that apparently Elise was kidnapped again, and deduce that maybe Eggman is the one who wanted to release Iblis. Oh yeah, after Sonic returned Elise back to the castle, Eggman threatened to level the city if she didn't come to him. Not wanting harm to come to her citizens, she decides to go. This still counts as kidnapping though, because she was essentially forced to make this decision. So, adding them all up, this means Elise was kidnapped a total of 5 times! Sonic meets up with Silver, who explains the situation to him as the two head off to save Elise. However, they are too late as Eggman's ship crashes, killing both him and Elise. Silver realizes there is still a way to save her, as they can use Chaos Control to travel back in time a few hours to board Eggman's ship before it takes off. The two use their emeralds to create a portal. Wait, where did Silver get that emerald? It's the same one that Duke used to seal Iblis in Elise's soul, but they never show him giving it to Silver. Anyways, they create a portal and Sonic tosses his emerald to Silver, saying he can handle this on his own and thanking Silver for his help. Silver and Blaze decide to head back to their own time and jump into the portal?
Wait, so despite them jumping into the exact same portal that Sonic did, they are somehow transported to a completely different point in time? How the fuck does that work?
Sonic manages to save Elise, battling Eggman one final time as he falls to his death. Jesus, that's dark. Shadow and Rouge regroup with Omega, who just learned from Mephiles that apparently Omega is the one who seals Shadow after Iblis is released. However, this doesn't seem to affect him all that much, as he doesn't seem upset at Omega, nor does he treat him differently. So, that went nowhere. Anyway, the three discover Mephiles looking for a Chaos Emerald in the desert and confront him right as he finds it. Mephiles tries once again to convince Shadow to join him, but Shadow once again declines. Shadow tries to seal him away in the scepter, but Mephiles manages to break out, stating that because he absorbed Shadow's power through his shadow, that no longer works. However, Shadow is still determined to go down his own path, taking off his inhibitor rings and plowing through Mephiles' shadow clones. Back in the future, Silver and Blaze confront Iblis once again, and after weakening him, Silver tries to use the same technique he saw in the past to seal Iblis in his soul, but it doesn't work, so Blaze does it instead since her soul is already alit with flames, sealing Iblis in her soul and using Chaos Control to seal both of them into a different dimension. So maybe that's why she's stated to be from a different dimension in Sonic Rush? Maybe this is how she ends up in the Soul Dimension? I don't know. Anyways, with Iblis gone, the sun finally shines once again. However, the world is still destroyed, so... With his previous plan having failed, Mephiles decides to confront Sonic himself, using the Chaos Emerald he has to distract Sonic and Elise, while he sneaks up behind them and pierces Sonic with a laser. Sonic grabs his chest as he falls down and goes limp.
Sonic fucking dies. Straight up, he is dead.
This causes Elise to be so upset that she cries, releasing Iblis from her soul, finally allowing Mephiles to rejoin with him as he calls all the Chaos Emeralds to him, and Solaris is reborn and engulfs the entire world in a white light. Everyone, except for Blaze for some reason, ends up on a platform in a strange timeless void where they learn of what has happened. Mephiles tricked them all, even Eggman. And before you say, oh, Blaze being here wouldn't make sense because she sealed herself in another dimension, reminder, Eggman fucking died and yet he's here. Despite Knuckles and Silver wanting to destroy Solaris, Eggman explains that it exists at all time periods at once, and defeating it in this one would do nothing, with Shadow saying that it might have been possible if Sonic was still alive. Elise then feels Sonic's presence in the wind, stating that it's not too late because apparently Sonic is only mostly dead.
Well, it just so happens that your friend here is only mostly dead. There's a big difference between mostly dead and all dead.
Yes, I know others have already made that joke, but it fits, so I'm sticking with it.
With this knowledge, Tails, Knuckles, Shadow, Rouge, Omega, Silver, and Amy set out to track down the Chaos Emeralds to use their power to revive Sonic. Elise does this by...
What the fuck? They seriously have a scene where a human girl kisses a dead hedgehog. So that's both necrophilia and bestiality. Who the fuck thought this was okay?
Anyways, Elise's weird fetish revives Sonic, with the Chaos Emeralds instantly transforming him into Super Sonic. He then shares this energy with Shadow and Silver, allowing them to transform into their super forms too. Apparently Silver also has a super form? Anyway, the three managed to neutralize Solaris, reverting him back into his original form, a small flame, which transports Sonic and Elise back in time to before the Solaris project. They deduce that if they put out the flames, Solaris won't exist and they won't have to worry about what happens. Elise is hesitant to do this, however, as it means she and Sonic will never meet.
I don't care what happens to the world.
Are we supposed to sympathize with her? She's choosing keeping her memories of someone she met like a day ago over the lives of billions, if not trillions of people.
Sonic tells her to smile and she blows out the flame, thus preventing this game's story from ever happening.
I hate this trope. I hate when writers use a cosmic retcon at the end. Yes, that is the actual name of that trope. It ultimately undermines any conflict or character growth in the story because at the end of the day, it technically never happened. And you know what's worse? This isn't the last time the series would do this, as 18 years later, the Netflix show Sonic Prime would do the exact same thing, albeit in a different way. But thankfully, the story is over, so now we can move on to the gameplay.
This game is split into three main character stories: Sonic, Shadow, and Silver, with a final story serving as the finale. Each hedgehog also has two amigos, that's how the game refers to them, a primary amigo and a secondary amigo. Sonic's primary amigo is Tails, and his secondary amigo is Knuckles, obviously. Shadow's primary amigo is Rouge, and his secondary amigo is Omega, again, obviously. And Silver's primary amigo is Blaze, and his secondary amigo is Amy. Occasionally throughout levels, you will switch to one of the amigos, but there are also instances where you'll switch to one of the other hedgehogs as well. There are a total of 12 different gameplay styles, as each character has one, except for Sonic, who has a whopping 4. So let's go in order. Sonic's main gameplay style is pretty much what you'd expect from a Sonic game. He can jump, homing attack, and spin dash. However, all three of these have issues. Firstly, you can't jump into enemies to destroy them. You know, like you can in every other Sonic game before this. You have to use the homing attack. Jumping directly into an enemy without using the homing attack will result in you getting hurt. The homing attack itself also has issues because, just like in the last 4 games, there is no homing reticle, so you don't know if you're locked onto an enemy or something else, or even nothing at all. There were many times I tried to homing attack an enemy, and Sonic either homing attacked something else or just did an air dash. Also, you can't jump out of a spin dash, kinda negating the burst of speed it's supposed to give you. You have to wait for Sonic to slow down and start running again. And please, if there is a way to cancel the spin dash, let me know, because I tried pressing every button on my controller and it did nothing. Also, if you see someone else in the comments telling me, don't post the same comment. I don't want to see a bunch of people telling me the same thing over and over. Anyway, Sonic also has this sweep kick move that is, for the most part, useless. Sonic also has unlockable abilities that you can purchase from the shop. Firstly is the light chip, which gives him the ability to do the light speed dash. And it suffers from the same issues it did previously because guess what? It's mapped to the exact same button as every other action. For God's sake, Yuji Naka, putting every action on one button doesn't make them easier to use! This is a problem that has existed since Adventure 1, but considering that game released 8 years before this one, you'd think they'd have fixed it by now. Seriously, the Xbox 360 controller has 12 mappable buttons, 2 joysticks, and a shitty D-pad. Why map everything to X? Or square on PS3. This is especially a problem after you get his third upgrade, the bounce bracelet, allowing him to do the bounce attack, returning from Adventure 2. Having both the bounce attack and lightspeed dash attached to the same button results in a lot of scenarios where you try to lightspeed dash but instead end up bouncing down, oftentimes to your death because there are a lot of ring trails above death pits. I kinda skipped over the second upgrade there, the anti-gravity chip, allowing Sonic to slide. It's just a slide. You activate it by holding down, you guessed it, X and square while moving. Lastly, Sonic has 7 gem abilities you can buy, which are conveniently all the same colors as the Chaos Emeralds. The blue gem gives you a quick burst of speed. Wait, is this canonically the first time the boost has appeared in a 3D game? The red gem slows down time to help you in tough situations. The green gem gives you a really pathetic tornado sweep kick. The white gem gives you a slightly different homing attack. Not sure what's so special about this. The Sky Gem lets you throw a ball to a specific location, and when it lands, Sonic is instantly pulled towards it like a grappling hook. The Yellow Gem gives you a pathetic lightning shield. Seriously, it's tiny and its ring attraction radius is small as fuck. Lastly, the Purple Gem shrinks you down and lets you do unlimited jumps. Also, there's an unused gem in the code called the Rainbow Gem. Its exact function was never implemented, but based on the animation Sonic does when it's activated via mods, it seems like it was intended to allow you to play as Super Sonic. Now here's where the interesting part comes in. See this gauge in the bottom right corner? Other characters have this to limit their abilities. Thing is, though, Sonic's meter was never coded properly. It never drains, meaning all the gem abilities can be used indefinitely. You can use the red gem to slow down time indefinitely to get a huge time bonus, or you could use the purple gem's infinite jump ability to bypass large sections of the level.
Nice going, developers. And that was just Sonic's main gameplay style. We still have 3 others to talk about, as well as all 8 other characters.
Sonic's second gameplay style is one that appears in the final sections of Wave Ocean, Crisis City, Radical Train, and Kingdom Valley, and that is Mach Speed. In these sections, Sonic is running at top speed and he doesn't stop. If you run into anything, and I mean anything, you will take damage. In addition to that, you for some goddamn reason cannot change your direction after jumping, which is a real problem in Crisis City and Kingdom Valley, where the level design for the Mach Speed sections is essentially just a straight fucking line. These sections suck and can very easily be an S-rank killer. Sonic's third gameplay style appears in Dusty Desert and Tropical Jungle, and that's him carrying Elise. While carrying Elise, Sonic can't use any of his moves aside from the homing attack. However, by holding down the right bumper, or R1 on PS3, you can activate a special power that turns Sonic into Jesus. Seriously, it lets him walk on water, and quicksand too, apparently. Sonic's last gameplay style appears in the first sections of White Acropolis and Crisis City, and that's snowboarding, or streetboarding in Crisis City's case. Basically, it works just like the snowboarding in Adventure 1's Ice Cap and the streetboarding in Adventure 2's City Escape. However, Sonic can sometimes get stuck on inclines or even go back up the mountain. That's not how physics work. Also, he can do this. Finally, moving on to other characters, next up we have Sonic's primary amigo, Tails. He can fly just like you'd expect, except just like in Heroes, once he runs out of stamina, he will drop like a fucking rock. He can also shoot dummy ring bombs. Essentially, these are fake rings that blow up enemies. You can rapid fire for a quick takeout, or you can hold and aim where to throw. Here's the problem though, the dummy rings look exactly the same as real rings, so if you get hit and lose your rings after throwing dummy rings, it can be hard to tell which ones are real and which ones are fake. You play as Tails a grand total of 5 times in a normal playthrough, not counting any optional missions, more on those later. In the middle of Sonic's Wave Ocean, in the middle of Sonic's White Acropolis, revisiting Wave Ocean later in the game as him, shortly into Sonic's Aquatic Base, and the first section of End of the World. Next up, we have Sonic's secondary amigo, Knuckles. He can glide and climb walls just like you'd expect. However, there's a major issue with his wall climbing, and that is sometimes he can get stuck on walls and you're unable to jump off. My best guess as to why this is happening is when you press the jump button on a wall, the code is telling him to jump off, but on either the same frame or the next frame, since he's close to a wall while jumping, the game thinks he's trying to cling onto the wall instead of jump off, so it puts him right back on. This glitch will happen seemingly at random, and the only way to get unstuck is to keep mashing the jump button until you finally can glide again. He can also punch and do a drill drive, but the range on both of these attacks are so small that you practically have to get right next to an enemy for it to work. You play as Knuckles 3 times in a normal playthrough, near the end of Sonic's Flame Core, near the end of Sonic's Aquatic Base, and the third section of End of the World. Moving on to the next main character, we have good old Edgy the Hedgy. Unlike past games where he was basically a skin swap for Sonic, this time Shadow has his own unique moveset focused more on combat. He can still homing attack, light dash, and sweep kick just like Sonic, however he can't spin dash anymore. Also, his homing attacks are a little delayed compared to Sonic because if you mash the jump button on an enemy, he will keep attacking them. In addition, he can also use Chaos Spear, a move that creates a spear of chaos energy that he can throw at targets. Shadow also has 3 Chaos Boost abilities which power him up. Basically, they just make him stronger and he can snap to nearby enemies. Apparently, if you have a full bar and fully powered up Chaos Boost, he can also do the Chaos Blast from his own game, but I've never been able to do it. Shadow also has 4 different vehicles spread throughout the levels. There's a hang glider, a buggy, a hovercraft, and a motorbike. The buggy and hang glider shoot out 2 missiles at a time, while the hovercraft and motorbike have machine guns. Be careful, however, because if you take too much damage, the vehicle will explode and probably kill you. Next up, we have Shadow's primary amigo, Rouge. Her gameplay is essentially a fusion of Tails and Knuckles. She can glide and climb walls like Knuckles, meaning the stuck on walls glitch happens with her too, and she throws bombs like Tails, although they're regular bombs, not fake rings. You play as her 5 times in a normal playthrough, in the middle of Shadow's White Acropolis, in the middle of Shadow's Kingdom Valley, near the end of Shadow's Flame Core, on her own in Tropical Jungle, and in the 5th section of End of the World. Next, we have Shadow's secondary amigo, E123 Omega. Omega controls very similar to Gamma from Adventure 1, in which he can shoot projectiles at enemies and can hover for a short period of time. However, if you spam the hover button rather than hold it down, you can cover a lot more distance. You play as him 4 times in a normal playthrough. In the second half of Shadow's first fight against Mephiles, in the middle of Shadow's Wave Ocean, in the middle of Shadow's Dusty Desert, and in the second section of End of the World. Moving on to our final main character, newcomer Silver. Silver's main power is psychokinesis, similar to telekinesis, in which he can control objects with his mind. To put it simply, when playing as Silver, you can pick up and throw objects without touching them. However, you can't do that to enemies normally. Instead, you have to stun them. At first, the only way to stun them is to get right up against them and bitch slap them, but later on you unlock the Shock Bracelet, which lets you send out a shockwave to stun multiple enemies at once. You also unlock the ability to do a short dash in the air, but it doesn't cover much ground. Silver can also hover just like Omega until the meter runs out. However, just like with Omega, if you spam the button instead of holding it, you cover more ground. Moving on to Silver's primary amigo, Blaze. She controls similar to Sonic, except her homing attack is tied to the action button rather than the jump button, and she can also do a double jump and a fire spin. You play as her 3 times, in the middle of Silver's Crisis City, on her own in Wave Ocean, and at the beginning of Silver's White Acropolis. Lastly, we have Silver's secondary amigo, Amy. Holy shit, her control scheme is the worst in the entire game. She is so goddamn slow. Her hammer is tiny and its range is awful. She has the ability to double jump just like Blaze, but for some reason her double jump halts all momentum. What the fuck? And she has the ability to turn invisible for some reason. It doesn't do much, and it's actually nearly impossible to see her, so what the fuck is the point? Thankfully, and I hate saying that about my favorite character, you only play as her 3 times. In the middle of Silver's Dusty Desert, in a mandatory town mission after Silver's fight against the Egg Genesis, and in the 6th section of End of the World. Just like Adventure 1, this game has hub worlds to explore, and they are boring. There's very little to do, there's no set pieces to make areas recognizable, and the textures are very flat and uninteresting. The forest is the worst of them in my opinion. It's so big and empty, and despite it being called the Soliana Forest, the forest itself only takes up about half the map. However, you'll see various people roaming around the hub worlds, and some of them have different colored marks above their heads. The yellow and orange ones are pretty useless for the most part, but the blue ones give you missions. Most of these missions are optional, a way to boost your ring count for the shop, but some of them are mandatory to progress the story, and my god, some of the mandatory ones are just wastes of time. Take, for example, the mission right after you fight Silver as Sonic called Who's the Captain? A member of the Royal Guard wants you to guess who the captain is, which turns out to be him. Now that alone would be just a minor annoyance if it weren't for the fact that Elise is currently captured by Eggman, and instead of doing their job and trying to save her, they're playing guessing games with the guy who actually is trying to save her.
How has this country not been taken over yet if the Royal Guard is this incompetent?
Moving on to the levels, there are a total of 10. Well, technically there are 9. The last one, End of the World, is just a mix of 7 of the other levels. Anyways, just like my Adventure 1 review, I'm going to cover them in the order that you visit them in Sonic's story, but I will mention where they appear for Shadow and Silver as well. First up, we have Wave Ocean, Sonic's first level. An extra level is Tails in between Sonic's Tropical Jungle and Kingdom Valley, Shadow's 7th level, and an extra level as Blaze in between Silver's Tropical Jungle and Dusty Desert. This level is basically just Emerald Coast Jr. Seriously, the beach theme, the lighthouses, being chased by a whale on a bridge. It's just Emerald Coast again. Sonic and Shadow both have 2 sections, the Water's Edge and the Inlet. That's what the music tracks are called. Whereas Tails and Blaze only go through the Water's Edge. Oddly though, Shadow goes through them backwards, and he also has a section of the Water's Edge that's exclusive to him. Next, we have Dusty Desert, Sonic's 2nd level, Shadow's 8th and final level, and Silver's 3rd level. This level has 2 sections, Quicksand and the Ruins. Sonic only ever goes through Quicksand, Silver only goes through the Ruins, but Shadow, since it's his final level, goes through both, and his is the longest of the 3. Also, there's this one bit at the end of Silver's run that everyone has complained about. You have to guide this giant billiard ball into this hole to open the door to the goal ring. What's the problem? The ball is extremely slow, there's a time limit on it, and Silver for some reason can't pick it up. You have to slap it to go the direction you want, but every time you do, the number goes down, and if you slap it when it's on 0, it'll explode. And also, there are other holes throughout the hallway. This puzzle is the worst in the game. But luckily, since this game is so buggy, you can stand on top of this crate and use your psychokinesis to clip through the top of the door, skipping the puzzle entirely. Also, minor note, I find it funny how in all 3 stories, Dusty Desert is right after Wave Ocean. Next up is White Acropolis, Sonic's 3rd level, Shadow's 1st level, and Silver's 4th level. It's just Ice Cap from Adventure 1. Seriously, snowboarding down a hill away from a mound of snow, that's Ice Cap. This level has 2 sections, Snowy Peak and the base. All 3 characters go through both sections. Not much to say about it, just try to avoid going into these spotlights or else more enemies will spawn. Next up, we have Crisis City, Sonic's 4th level, Shadow's 3rd level, and Silver's 1st level. This level is interesting because there are 5 sections, but each character has a different amount. Sonic and Shadow have 4, and Silver has 3. There are also only 4 different music sections, which are actually just different parts of the same song. The Flame, Skyscraper, Tornado, and Whirlwind. Sonic and Shadow's 1st section, which plays The Flame, has you going down many roads and buildings with Sonic streetboarding on a piece of metal. Every character has the same 2nd section, Skyscraper, but Silver and Blaze only go through the 2nd half of it backwards. Sonic and Shadow have the same 3rd section inside this whirlwind, but Shadow is using the hang glider while Sonic is on the floating pieces of rubble. Also, what's weird is that even though this section is technically whirlwind, for Sonic, it plays Tornado instead of whirlwind. Weird. Sonic's last section is a Mach Speed segment where he's being chased by a tornado, but it plays Whirlwind's music. Bruh. Shadow's last section has you traversing more buildings and watching out for objects being flung out of the tornado. Now for Silver, both his first and third sections are the same as Shadow's fourth. Silver's first section, The Flame, is the first half, and his third section, Tornado, is the second half, but backwards. Next up is Flame Core, Sonic's 5th level, Shadow's 4th level, and Silver's 8th and final level. It's just Red Mountain from Adventure 1, but at night. However, despite that, this music kicks ass! I'll talk more about the rest of the music later, but just listen to this! This level has two sections, Volcano and the Cavern. All three characters go through both. However, shortly into the cavern, you have this section where the paths split as Sonic and Shadow go through this door, whereas Silver goes through this one, and the rest of his level is completely different. Next, we have Radical Train, Sonic's 6th level, Shadow's 5th level, and Silver's 5th level. This level has two sections, the Abandoned Mine and the Chase. Sonic and Shadow go through both, while Silver only goes through the Abandoned Mine. For Sonic and Shadow, you're on a time limit during the first section, as you have to get to each station to either prevent the passenger train from running into bombs as Sonic, or deal damage to Eggman's train as Shadow. Silver doesn't have a time limit, so you can go at your own pace as him. Also, this is the only level in the game where all three hedgehogs are traveling through it at the same time, though they don't cross paths until after the level. Next, we have Tropical Jungle, Sonic's 7th level, an extra level as Rouge in between Shadow's Flame Core and Radical Train, and Silver's 2nd level. It's a jungle, not much to say regarding that. Interestingly, however, there are three sections, the jungle, the swamp, and the ruins. Sonic only goes through the jungle and the swamp, while Rouge and Silver only go through the ruins. And since the ruins is designed for the flying characters, it's much more boxed in and doesn't really have a designated route. Next, we have my favorite level in the whole game, Kingdom Valley. Sonic's 8th level, Shadow's 2nd level, and Silver's 7th level. It's kind of funny to me that for both Sonic and Silver, this is their penultimate level, but for Shadow, it's his 2nd. Anyways, this level has 4 sections, but just like Crisis City, they're not tied to the music. There are 4 music sections, which, just like Crisis City, are just 4 segments of one song. Wind, the Castle, which are both the same part of the song, technically speaking, Lakeside, and Water. Sonic's first section has you going through a valley and plays Wind. Shadow's first section is in the same area, but backwards and on a hang glider, and it plays Lakeside for some reason. Silver's first section has you going through the castle area, also playing Wind. Sonic's second section is the second half of Silver's first section, where you actually play as Silver, and it plays Lakeside. Shadow's second section, which plays the Wind, is the same area in full, but backwards, and you actually first play as Rouge hunting down 3 keys. Sound familiar? Yeah, well, there's no radar this time. Luckily, the keys always spawn in the same location, so if you remember where they are, it's really quick. Sonic's third section, Shadow's third section, and Silver's second section are all the same as well, except Shadow goes through it backwards. For Sonic, it plays the castle, but for Shadow and Silver, it plays water. And in Silver's version, there's a brief period where you play as Sonic. Lastly, Sonic's fourth section is another Mach Speed segment, and it plays water. Next up, we have Aquatic Base, Sonic's 9th and final level, Shadow's 6th level, and Silver's 6th level. Interestingly, for Sonic, you're in the present time chasing Eggman, but for Shadow and Silver, you're 10 years in the past chasing Mephiles and Iblis respectively. This is also the only level in Sonic's story where you switch to both Tails and Knuckles in the same level. Also, in Shadow and Silver's versions, there are brief sections where you play as the other hedgehog. don't know why there wasn't a section in either Crisis City or Flame Core where you switch between Sonic and Shadow, but okay. Anyways, there are 2 sections, level 1 and level 2. That's what they're called in the soundtrack. And all 3 characters go through both. There's also this rolling ball section, which is utter hell because the ball is so slippery and the turn radius is garbage. Also, minor note, I find it interesting how Shadow and Silver split up to chase down their respective targets, but if you memorize the level design across all 3 versions, which I did, you realize that their goal rings are in the exact same spot. Lastly, we have the final level, End of the World. Like I mentioned earlier, this level is actually just a combination of 7 of the previous levels where you play as 7 of the 9 characters. You start out as Tails in Crisis City, then Omega in Flame Core, then Knuckles in Tropical Jungle, then Silver in Dusty Desert, then Rouge in Wave Ocean, then Amy in White Acropolis, and lastly Shadow in Kingdom Valley, with the goal in each section being to find one of the Chaos Emeralds. I also love how the music gets progressively more intense, but also eerie with each section, which I can really only emphasize by playing the whole song, so skip to this point in the video if you want to skip this section, but here's the full song now. Now let's talk about the bosses. There are a total of 11 bosses. Egg Cerberus, Egg Genesis, Egg Wyvern, 3 Iblis battles, 2 Mephiles battles, 2 character battles, and the final boss Solaris. Each main hedgehog has 5 bosses. First we have the Egg Cerberus, Sonic's first boss right before Dusty Desert, and Shadow's first boss right after White Acropolis. I've talked about why I like this boss in the past, go watch my top 10 first bosses video if you haven't already, but I will say even though the boss is good, there are still problems like the camera not focusing on the boss when it's in the main arena, and my issue with its name. Like I said before, Cerberus was a 3-headed dog in Greek mythology, but this thing only has 1 head, so it's not a Cerberus. Next we have the Egg Genesis, Sonic's 4th boss right after Radical Train, and Silver's 3rd boss right after White Acropolis. This boss will send out lasers, missiles, and robots to attack you. As Sonic, you need to wait for it to drop down so you can either homing attack the bottom or use the robots to make your way to the top and bounce attack its head. As Silver, you just grab either the boxes in the arena or the missiles it throws at you and throw them back at its weak spot. Also, this boss uses the same music as Egg Cerberus. Next, we have the Egg Wyvern, Sonic's 5th and last boss right after Aquatic Base. It's actually pretty good. Sure, it's a lot of waiting, but you actually have to pay attention to where he's going to attack. Plus, the red gem comes in real handy for this boss when you're trying to guide it into falling debris. Also, the music here is a remix of the music of Egg Cerberus and Egg Genesis. Next, we have Iblis Phase 1, Silver's first boss right after Crisis City. Basically, you have to dodge its attacks and throw any bit of debris or fireballs you can pick up at its head. Yes, it has to be its head. If you hit any other part of its body, it will do no damage. Next, we have Iblis Phase 2, Sonic's 3rd boss and Shadow's 2nd boss, both right after Flame Core. This boss is boring. You spend most of your time waiting, dodging attacks, and then once you can get to these orbs, you attack them to draw Iblis in. Of course, you could just damage boost through the lava if you're willing to lose all your rings, since they just fall straight through, leaving you unable to recollect them. Also, one thing I find funny is despite this being called Phase 2, it's technically the first form of Iblis you fight on a normal playthrough. Like, I get that story-wise this is happening after Silver's fight, but if you play through all of Sonic's story, then all of Shadow's story, and then Silver's story, you'll fight Phase 2 twice before fighting Phase 1. Also, the boss music here is the same as Phase 1. Next up, we have Iblis Phase 3, Silver's 5th and final boss right after Flame Core. Just like Phase 1, your job is to dodge its attacks and throw anything you can pick up at its head. Again, it has to be the head. If you hit any other part of its body, it won't do any damage. And the boss music here is a remix of Phases 1 and 2. Next up, we have Mephiles Phase 1, Shadow's third boss right after Rouge's Tropical Jungle. You have to attack his shadow creatures to build up your gauge and use Chaos Boost to lure him out of Shadow's shadow so you can attack him. Once the first half is done, you switch to Omega, where you just shoot at him constantly. Funnily enough, this is the only boss in the main game where you play as one of the amigos instead of them just following behind you. Also, I love how the music here is a nice mix of eerie and upbeat. Next, we have Mephiles Phase 2, Shadow's fifth and final boss right after Dusty Desert. Once again, you have to attack his shadow creatures, which combine together into giant shadow creatures, to fill your gauge and then use Chaos Boost to lure him out and attack him. Also, the music here is once again a nice mix of eerie and upbeat. Editing Jackie here. I started writing this script before Sonic X Shadow Generations released, but now that it has, I just want to say I'm happy this boss is back in that game because Mephiles is one of my favorite characters. Another thing I want to add is that I was extracting this game's audio from the files because I like to use the raw, uncompressed audio in my videos, and I just want to point out that the music file for this boss is called boss_Mephiles 3. The Mephiles part is likely just English, but the fact that it has a 3 at the end is interesting because the file for Phase 1 is called boss_Mephiles 1, and there's no boss_Mephiles 2. This makes me wonder if this boss was originally going to be Phase 3, and there would have been a different Phase 2 that would use the same music as Phase 1, but it got cut from the game for some reason. Next up, we have the two character battles, Sonic vs. Silver, which is both of their second bosses after Dusty Desert, and Shadow vs. Silver, which is both of their fourth bosses after Radical Train. I'm putting both bosses here because they are essentially the same. As Sonic and Shadow respectively, you just have to avoid Silver long enough for him to try to throw items at you, saying, and then attack him. If you get too close to him when he's not holding anything, he'll pick you up and say,
It's no use!
Which has become a meme in the Sonic fanbase. And as Silver, you just have to pick up items and throw them at Sonic and Shadow. Also, the music here is very upbeat and I love it. Lastly, we have Solaris, the final boss. You fight him as Super Sonic, Super Shadow, and Super Silver. There are 2 phases, and they are really easy. As Sonic and Shadow, you build up energy by holding down the right trigger, or R1 on PS3, and then when the gauge is full, attack by pressing X, or square on PS3. As Silver, grab any objects he throws at you and throw them back. But don't stay in one place or else he can attack you. But really, this is one of the easiest final bosses in the series. Seriously, here's my strategy. Phase 1. Switch to Silver and attack him until his left arm breaks. Then switch to Shadow and attack him until his right arm breaks. Then switch to Sonic and attack him until his head and body break. At this point, you can attack as any character, but it's easiest to keep being Sonic. Phase 2. Attack him as Sonic until half his health bar is gone, then switch to Shadow and keep attacking for the rest of the fight. If at any point you run low on rings, switch to another character and keep dodging for a few seconds to ensure the character you want to play as recollects enough rings. That's it. Though, one thing I will point out is that Phase 1's music has this Gregorian chant at the beginning. This translates to, do not wish forth the willed holy name's schism. Do not welcome the schism's grave melody. No force will be there to be seen. So send a new force that will be. Live is a holy power if it lits the truth. Live is a holy power if it lits the truth. Basically, this is meant to be a warning. The schism is the splitting of Solaris into Iblis and Mephiles. Doing this will anger them, and if they rejoin, Solaris will destroy existence itself to punish humanity for its act of blasphemy. Humanity should not try to gain Solaris's power, as life itself is already a holy power.
This is a fucking Sonic game, by the way.
Anyways, Phase 2's music is the best song in the game. Since I've been talking about the music so much, let's get to that. As I've mentioned and also demonstrated, this game's music is fucking awesome and is the best part of this game. Here are some of my favorites, aside from what I've already played. Now for the voices. All of the returning characters have the same voices they did in Shadow the Hedgehog, except for Omega. Omega is voiced by the late Maddie Blaustein. Stein, I don't know, who also voiced Meowth in the Pokemon anime. Holy shit, Omega was voiced by a trans woman? That's awesome! Sadly, I don't really like her take on Omega. I don't blame her, it was probably just bad direction, but in previous games, Omega sounded fierce and full of emotion despite being a robot, whereas here, he sounds like a typical robot.
System reactivation countdown initiated. Backup power source. Spare magazines secured. Command program priority changed. New mission, Shadow support.
Now for the new characters. Silver is voiced by Pete Capella, and his Silver voice is honestly my favorite of the three we've had.
What's the point of all this? It'll never end. How can we completely destroy Iblis?
Blaze is voiced by Bella Hudson, who also voiced her in Sonic Rush, even though there was very little spoken dialogue in that game.
So, this is the past. I hope Silver is okay. He's pretty insecure when he's alone. The Iblis trigger. Blue Hedgehog.
Mephiles is voiced by Dan Green, the same guy who voices Knuckles.
After the world was devastated by Iblis's flames, what do you think happened? A search for the guilty. Who did this, you may ask? Humanity wasn't just jealous of your power. They feared it. They used this incident as an excuse to hunt you down.
I love Mephiles' voice in this game. It's extremely menacing and it works really well. The Duke is voiced by David Wills, the same guy who voiced Espio in Shadow the Hedgehog.
You're a good girl, Elise. Remember, be brave. Don't cry, no matter what happens.
Lastly, Elise is voiced by Lacey Chabert. Yes, the Lacey Chabert. Gretchen from Mean Girls, the original voice of Meg from Family Guy, Gwen Stacy from The Spectacular Spider-Man, and much more.
What are you trying to do, Dr. Eggman? Why do you wish to revive the flames of disaster?
Lastly, this game has DLC, which you can no longer get because the Xbox 360 Marketplace was shut down and this game isn't part of the backwards compatibility program. There are 7 DLC packs, very hard missions for each of the 3 main hedgehogs, boss attack mode for each of the 3 main hedgehogs, and Team Attack Amigo. The very hard missions are exactly that. Very hard difficulty. Interestingly, though, it's not just making the levels harder, but sometimes changing up the level entirely, like going through Sonic's Dusty Desert without Elise, or fighting Eggman's robots in Crisis City instead of Iblis's monsters. Boss attack mode is also exactly what it says, a boss attack. Now, I had never played the Boss Attack DLC before recording for this video, so I was expecting it to just be each character's bosses in a row, and that's it. So, color me surprised to find out that not only are the bosses themselves harder, but there's also these robot horde fights in between some bosses. Lastly is Team Attack Amigo. This mode has you running through various levels as 3 of the Amigos. You start out as Tails in Sonic and Shadow's first section of Crisis City, albeit going backwards. Then you play as Tails in the first section of Radical Train, specifically Sonic's version, where you have to stop the train from hitting the bombs. Then you play as Tails in Sonic's first section of Kingdom Valley, again going backwards. Then you play as Blaze in Sonic's first section of Tropical Jungle. Then you play as Blaze in the second section of Aquatic Base, specifically Sonic's version. Then you play as Omega in Sonic's Dusty Desert, once again going backwards. Then you play as Omega in the second section of White Acropolis, once again Sonic's version going backwards. And then lastly, you fight Silver's version of the Egg Genesis as Omega.
So in the end, what are my final thoughts?
Despite how much criticism I've given this game in this review, in the end, I don't hate it. In fact, I actually quite enjoy playing it. The story is absolutely a mess, no doubt there, but it does have some redeeming qualities. Shadow is honestly at his best in this game character-wise, and he's shown to have actually moved on from his past and wants to create his own path. Plus, this line at the end of his story is one of the best lines in the entire series.
If the world chooses to become my enemy, I will fight
like I always have.
Mephiles is genuinely one of my favorite characters in the entire series. He's cunning, determined, and even a bit creepy. He genuinely believes humanity should die and is willing to do whatever it takes to get there, even manipulating others to get his way. It's not explained very well, but he was the one who manipulated Eggman into kidnapping Elise, as he knew Sonic would come to rescue her, thus allowing the two of them to get closer, thus allowing Iblis to be released should Sonic die. Aside from Mephiles, Silver is also one of my favorite characters in the entire series. He's shown to genuinely care about others and wants to help them, as seen with him willingly postponing finding the Iblis trigger to help Amy find Sonic, unaware that they're both looking for the same guy. And you could say that him blindingly trusting Mephiles and failing to see the massive red flags he's giving off is stupid, but you also gotta remember what kind of life he lives. He lives in a post-apocalyptic world where life is hell for everyone, and he wants to fix it at any cost. So when someone comes along saying they have the ability to help him save the world, of course he's gonna go along with it. He's desperate and willing to try anything if it means helping everyone live better lives. And he has a strong bond with Blaze. Whether or not that bond is romantic is never touched on in the game, but either way, as we see him genuinely devastated when she mentions sealing herself in another dimension. The music, as I've stated multiple times, is amazing, one of the best soundtracks in the whole series, and even though the gameplay is very stiff and littered with bugs and glitches, it still isn't the worst gameplay we've had in the series, and hell, some of the glitches are actually fun to mess around with. While I had an absolutely terrible time with Shadow the Hedgehog, I actually enjoyed replaying this game for the review. Is it one I'd replay constantly? Probably not, but, and I know this will probably get me a lot of flack, I would honestly rather play this game over Sonic 1, Sonic CD, or even, minor spoilers for a future review, Sonic Colors. However, I do recognize that from an objective standpoint, this game is a rushed, unfinished mess. This is the first and probably only time I'm going to do this, but I'm actually going to give this game 2 different scores. An objective score, how I think it ranks against other games in general from a pure development standpoint, and a subjective score, how I personally enjoyed it. My objective score would be a 2 out of 10, as, again, it was rushed and unfinished, which it shouldn't have been. My subjective score, however, is an 06 out of 10. That's not a joke. I actually personally give it a 6 out of 10. Before I finish, I'd like to give a little spotlight to Project 06, a fan-made remake/PC port of the game developed by Chaos X and others. P06's goal is not only to port Sonic 06 to the PC, but also improve it, and honestly, this is one of the best Sonic games I've ever played, fan-made notwithstanding. It fixes a lot of the bugs the original game had, and even adds some new features that were either unused or just weren't in the original game at all. As of right now, all 9 characters are fully playable, as are all the levels from the 3 main stories, and right now Chaos X and the team are working on the final update to this game, which will bring the final level and all the bosses in. If you have a PC and want a chance to play Sonic 06 done right, play this game. It's completely free and well worth your time. I might do a review of P06 itself once the final update comes out, but I make no promises.
Oh, I'm glad I finally got that done. This is probably the longest review I've ever done. It's probably even longer than my Frontiers review. Anyways, in terms of these reviews, next time we're going to be continuing the dual retrospective with a bonus review. A look at an old Sonic arcade game that was Japan exclusive upon release, but it still had influence on later games. So, I will see you all next time with Sega Sonic the Hedgehog. After that, we're going to be mostly alternating between the classic and modern side of this dual retrospective until we reach the end. Here's the itinerary for the rest of the dual retrospective. Like I said, next time we're going to be taking a look at Sega Sonic the Hedgehog. Then after that, we're going to be doing Sonic 3D Blast, all versions. Then after that, we're going to be doing Sonic Unleashed, the HD version only. After that, we're going to be doing Sonic Spinball, again, all versions. After that, we're going to be doing Sonic Colors, the Wii version only. After that, we're going to be doing a redive for Sonic Colors Ultimate. After that, we're going to be doing Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, again, all versions. After that, we'll be doing Sonic Generations, the HD version only. After that, we'll do another redive for Sonic X Shadow Generations. After that, we'll do Knuckles Chaotix. After that will be Sonic Lost World, the HD version only. After that will be Sonic Mania. Then after that will be Sonic Forces. And then after that will be Sonic Mania Plus. And that will be the end of this dual retrospective. So, Yeah, so thank you all for watching, and like I said, I'll see you next time with my review of Sega's Sonic the Hedgehog.